Just imagine if the Grand Canyon was just discovered this week and there was a government that controlled it, but they were under the influence of a lot of forces. How would that go? It wouldn't go well.
So I first heard about Songdong must have been 2016. I was working on a now sadly defunct travel magazine, online magazine if you will, and I think my researcher threw something across my desk, and I wasn't very interested in caving at that time, to be honest. And I remember looking at the pictures and thinking, wow, that looks pretty cool. So I tried to book a trip. This was sort of fall 2016. And it was basically sold out, so I got one of the last spots in spring 2017, and that was my first trip to Songdong. Visiting Songdong is completely different to really anything I'd ever done before. I mean, actually, the irony is the only equivalence I can draw is when I went to North Korea in 2010, and that was in a perverse way similar, because going to North Korea it feels as though you're stepping back in time to, like, Soviet 1950s, etc., etc. Songdong also feels like you're stepping back in time, but you're going much, much further back to a Jurassic time. So in total, I went to Songdong 8 times over a 5-year period. There were some years I'd do 2 trips, and there were some years I'd do 1 trip. And I also did additional separate trips to Hanghen, which is currently the 3rd largest cave in the world and is also in the film. What was it like shooting in the cave? Well, I mean, shooting in a cave is challenging at the best of times because, I mean, the most important currency in filmmaking, aside of course from money and time, is light, and in a cave there's not a lot of light. That said, in Songdong there are 2 primary light sources, which helps a lot. You have the 2 dough lines, which certainly at certain points, maybe around midday or whatever, at a certain point of year, are letting in a tremendous amount of light, and you see that with some of the fairly dramatic sunbeam footage which I and others have shot. So that certainly helps. There are obviously darker parts of the cave, and what I really wanted to do as much as possible is film without adding additional light sources. Quite often when people shoot in Songdong, they bring in not necessarily big floodlights, but certainly portable light sources which are extremely bright. As much as possible, I wanted to avoid using those because I think the beauty is in the contrast. The beauty is in the shadows as much as the lighted portions, and when you start to bring in artificial light, it just loses some of its essence. There are 1 or 2 shots in the film which are lit by additional sources, but they are very few and far between. For example, I have a shot fairly late on which shows the descent into Songdong from the entrance, and I've showed it to some people who are very familiar with Songdong and have been in many more times than me, and they're amazed it looks that bright. But it really is only lit from the slither of light which the entrance grants you, and then of course the headlamps on the individual cavers. Other challenges, mainly it's always about time. So on each trip I had a sort of a goal or focus which I wanted to achieve, but you are moving through the cave, so there's not a lot of returning to the spot you were before. You start at the entrance and then you move through to we describe as the exit. So I'm constantly trying to get as much coverage as I need to, but inevitably each trip I didn't get everything I wanted, hence the reason why I kept on going back and back and back. And another reason I went back multiple times is because I made quite a lot of mistakes. There are problems when you're trying to navigate a floor which is extremely rocky and precarious, whilst trying to film on sort of 3 or 4 hours sleep, because you got up at 4 in the morning the morning before to shoot the porters putting breakfast together. So fighting tiredness and trying to stay alive and shooting was challenging. So it's interesting because when I've mentioned to caving friends or people who are familiar with caving but aren't necessarily familiar with my project, I've always said, I'm making a film about this big cave in Vietnam, and they said, you're making a caving film, and I don't necessarily class this film as a caving film. There is a subgenre of filmmaking which are caving films, and some of them are very, very good, but they are mostly made for other cavers. Let's say that they might have might not necessarily be that accessible to people who aren't really interested in caving. And what I wanted to do, and I'm not a caver, I should make that 100% clear. I wasn't particularly interested in caving prior to making this film, but what I wanted to do was make a film which was accessible to all people, not just cavers. And to be completely honest, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a film about a cave, as ludicrous as that sounds. It's certainly about caving per se, but my goal and the idea behind the film was to make a film broader than that. A film which addresses themes such as, well, how we protect, how we manage our natural heritage, where our relationship with the environment is the environment something which is just there for us to milk for our own benefit, or is it something which is much greater than ourselves and we are merely custodians of this thing? I mean, the conservation and environmental issues the film addresses in approaching those broader themes was to try not to dilute the complexity of them. It's all very well to say that, you know, a place of natural beauty should be protected at all costs, and I think there is a strong argument for that. But certainly one of the things which a lot of the people who I interviewed talked about was this question of balance between the benefits which a place like Songdong can bring to the local community and the conservation element as well, and where is that optimum balance point which is able to support both of those things. And you know, I don't think there's an easy answer there, and I think that again I was trying to convey that in the film, that there is almost a tension between these 2 points. Where is the balance point, and also how precarious that is, because if you tip one way or the other, then it could have detrimental effects either way. So really my goal was not to dumb down the complexities, but really try and show the full picture, if you will, provide a degree of balance to proceedings. I mean, I obviously have my own opinion, and maybe that seeps through in the film, but as much as possible I wanted to ask questions and sort of present the facts more than anything else, and allow the audience to decide.